6:42 on January 17, 2024, the ice screamed as steel met stone. The wind cuts at -31 degrees Celsius, sharp enough to burn exposed skin in seconds. An autonomous drilling rig hums across the white emptiness of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, its hydraulic arms biting slowly into blue ice that has not moved for thousands of years. The sound is wrong here, metallic, intrusive, unnatural. The operator monitoring the feed from 2,800 kilometers away notices a sudden vibration spike. The drill stops. Beneath 11.4 meters of compacted ice, the camera reveals something angular. Manufactured. Rusted. The surface is stamped with numbers, still legible despite decades of corrosion. Within minutes, the Norwegian Polar Institute halts the survey. Satellite phones come out. Coordinates are logged twice. Then again, what they have uncovered is not geological. It is historical. Within 48 hours, a joint team assembles: glaciologists, structural engineers, forensic archivists, and 2 military historians specializing in late-war German engineering. The site lies 340 kilometers from the nearest research station, an area previously mapped only by aerial radar in 1989. No known structures were supposed to exist here. Yet ground-penetrating scans now show a hollow cavity nearly 18 meters long, reinforced by steel ribs in a pattern instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with 1940s German construction. When the ice is carefully removed, they find a sealed metal crate bolted to the bedrock. The bolts are imperial, not metric. The welds are hand-done. Inside the crate, preserved by constant cold, are oilcloth-wrapped folders, technical drawings, and a leather-bound journal. The eagle insignia is unmistakable. So is the date stamped on the first page. The documents carry the signature of a Waffen-SS engineer officially declared dead in April 1945. According to post-war records, he perished during the collapse of Germany's southern defenses. His body never recovered. His unit destroyed. His name appears in casualty lists. His file is marked closed. But the crate is real. The ink is real. And the coordinates written in the journal match this exact location within 6 meters. The discovery raises immediate questions. Why Antarctica? Why build here, in a place where temperatures drop below -50 degrees and darkness lasts for months? And how did a man presumed dead manage to leave Europe, transport materials across oceans, and leave behind an archive that survived 82 years of ice, war, and silence? If you want to see how this story unfolds, hit the like button. Because what lies beneath this ice is not just a forgotten archive. It is a challenge to an official history that has stood for generations. And the most unsettling question remains unanswered. If he died in 1945, who sealed this crate? The man at the center of this mystery was not famous. He was not a general, nor a public figure whose name echoed through post-war trials. He was a mid-level Waffen-SS engineer, born in 1909 in Saxony, trained first as a civil technician before being absorbed into the SS construction and logistics apparatus in the late 1930s. By 1942, at the age of 33, he was already known among peers as meticulous, quiet, and intensely methodical. Colleagues described him as ordinary. He did not drink heavily. He avoided politics in conversation. His evaluations emphasized reliability over ideology. He worked on reinforced concrete bunkers, underground fuel depots, and cold weather infrastructure, projects that required patience more than charisma. However, his personnel file contains an unusual number of foreign climate certifications, including Arctic construction protocols approved in 1943. At the time, this raised no alarms. Germany was fighting on multiple fronts. Specialized engineers were rotated constantly. But in hindsight, that training stands out. By late 1944, the war situation is collapsing. Allied forces push from the west. The Red Army advances relentlessly from the east. German industry is shattered. Rail lines are bombed daily. Fuel shortages reach critical levels, with reserves dropping below 25% capacity by January 1945. Orders become contradictory. Evacuations are chaotic. Entire units disappear from command maps. Official records state that the engineers unit was reassigned to emergency fortification work near the Alps in February 1945. 3 weeks later, his name appears on a casualty list. No witnesses. No remains. His commanding officer is killed days later. The file is closed. But something doesn't add up. In the final months of the war, Germany launches a flurry of secretive logistical movements. Submarines depart without standard manifests. Scientific personnel are reassigned without explanation. Equipment is shipped south instead of east or west. However, most historians attribute this to desperation rather than strategy. Yet buried in naval archives are references to southern storage contingencies, vague and unsigned. There are fuel consumption anomalies, missing engineering units, and requests for cold weather supplies that exceed any known operational requirement. By March 1945, as Berlin prepares for siege, the engineer's name appears one last time. On a requisition order for specialized steel alloys rated for extreme temperature variance. The destination is redacted. The quantity is small but precise. Enough for reinforcement, not habitation. What they didn't know was that this was not a supply request. It was a departure notice. The official destination listed on the engineer's final travel authorization is Innsbruck. It is dated March 9, 1945, stamped at 1420, and countersigned by a logistics officer whose own records vanish weeks later. Innsbruck makes sense on paper. The Alps are becoming a last redoubt. Engineers are needed for tunnels, demolitions, emergency fortifications. Trains still run sporadically through Bavaria. At least, that is what the paperwork says. But the rail logs tell a different story. On March 11th, a transport convoy leaves Hamburg harbor under heavy fog. The manifest lists machine parts, industrial lubricants, and sealed crates labeled meteorological instruments. Total weight, 18.7 metric tons. The destination is marked only as Sudret. No port is specified. However, fuel consumption records indicate the ship does not head towards Spain or Italy. It moves southwest, then south, hugging the Atlantic lanes used by long-range U-boats. The engineer is not listed among the crew, but his signature appears on the crate inventory. The journey begins quietly. No dramatic escape. No last-minute firefights. He travels under a civilian cover identity, issued weeks earlier, with papers identifying him as a technical consultant for polar research. The irony is brutal. The cover is almost honest. By April 2, 1945, Allied bombing has reduced Hamburg's port operations by nearly 60%. Yet this vessel slips out during a narrow weather window, escorted for 140 nautical miles before disappearing into open ocean. The engineer boards under darkness. The deck smells of diesel and salt. The temperature hovers just above freezing. He carries only one personal bag and a metal tube containing rolled schematics. However, the Atlantic does not cooperate. By day 7, the ship encounters a storm system with waves exceeding 9 meters. Cargo shifts. 2 crates break loose. One man fractures a rib. The engineer helps secure the load, hands numb, gloves soaked. Then the first real crisis hits. British patrol aircraft are spotted at 11:42 on April 14th. The ship kills its engines. Silence stretches for 27 minutes. Sweat freezes on skin. The engineer counts rivets in the bulkhead to stay calm. The planes pass. But fuel burn during evasive maneuvers pushes reserves dangerously low. They are forced to rendezvous with a submarine supply point farther south than planned. That rendezvous never comes. Instead, after 19 days at sea, the ship limps into a remote refueling point near the South Atlantic convergence. Coordinates are written in pencil, then erased. The temperature drops steadily as latitude increases. Ice begins forming on exposed railings. The engineer notes wind speeds exceeding 60 kilometers per hour. Supplies are rationed to 1,800 calories per man. However, turning back is no longer an option. The final leg is the most dangerous. Navigation becomes guesswork. Magnetic compasses behave erratically. On May 6, 1945, 2 days before Germany's surrender, the ship reaches the edge of the Antarctic ice shelf. There is no harbor, only pack ice and darkness. They offload at night. 3 small motorized sleds carry crates across unstable ice, each trip taking 47 minutes. One sled breaks through. 2 men are lost. The engineer survives by sheer proximity to the edge. His boots freeze solid by morning. By May 12th, a temporary shelter is erected. Steel ribs are anchored into rock. The engineer supervises despite frostbite setting into his fingers. He works for 14 hours a day. No flags are raised. No messages are sent. When the final crate is sealed and bolted down, the fuel gauge reads 8%. The ship leaves. He does not. The silence that follows is immediate and absolute. The wind howls constantly. Temperatures drop below -40. The engineer is alone with his archive, his calculations, and a plan that now depends on one thing above all else: time. He writes one final entry before the ink thickens in the cold. The man himself, meanwhile, constructs a different life. Evidence suggests he leaves Antarctica within 2 years. How remains unclear. A fragmentary shipping receipt from 1947 references technical cargo loaded at a southern latitude onto a whaling vessel. The signature is illegible. From there, he surfaces briefly in South America under a civilian identity, working as a draftsman. He marries again. He has 1 child. He keeps his routine narrow: work, home, silence. However, one investigator never lets go. A West German archivist reviewing SS engineering records in 1968 notes missing schematics tied to polar-rated construction. He writes a memo. It goes unanswered. In 1979, an Argentine journalist receives a tip about a German engineer who avoids photographs and refuses interviews. The article never runs. The source withdraws. Decades pass. Cold trails accumulate. Witnesses die. Boxes are moved, mislabeled, lost. By the 1990s, the engineer's name appears only in footnotes. The secret seems buried as deeply as the ice that hides the crate. The secret died with him, or so they thought. The first inquiries begin quietly, months after the war ends. In July 1945, Allied counterintelligence units sift through collapsed German ministries, charred rail offices, and half-flooded naval archives. Investigators are systematic. They catalog names, cross-check transport logs, and interview surviving officers. The Waffen-SS engineer's file is thin, too thin. It lists a presumed death date, April 18, 1945, without a location. No witness statements. No recovery attempt. But the chaos of the final weeks produces thousands of similar cases. At first, nothing stands out. However, an American investigator assigned to missing technical personnel notices a discrepancy. The engineer's ration card is redeemed on March 28, 1945, in Hamburg. Yet his unit is officially stationed 680 kilometers south. When questioned, the clerk remembers nothing. The ledger page containing the transaction is torn out. Interrogations follow. A surviving logistics officer claims the engineer was reassigned, then shrugs. Another insists he never boarded the Alpine transport. A third produces a carbon copy travel authorization to Innsbruck, stamped but unsigned. Each answer is plausible. None are conclusive. The investigators mark the file inconclusive rather than escaped. But the paper trail continues to fray. In 1947, British naval intelligence flags irregular fuel draws from a Hamburg depot during the first week of April 1945. The quantities, 12,000 liters over 3 days, are too large for civilian evacuation, too small for a military operation. The corresponding shipping logs are missing. When pressed, the depot supervisor claims the records were destroyed in an air raid. The crater measurements do not support his account. However, without a body, suspicion remains abstract. By the early 1950s, priorities shift. The Cold War accelerates. Former enemies become reluctant assets. Files are shelved. The engineer is officially declared dead. His name is added to a registry. The excavation begins under controlled conditions in February 2024. A 6-person team establishes a temporary perimeter around the site in Queen Maud Land. They deploy thermal blankets, ground-penetrating radar, and a modular containment tent rated for -50°C. Every movement is logged. Every object is photographed before it is touched. The goal is preservation, not speed. The first chamber is opened after 4 days of careful ice removal. Inside, they find structural elements, steel ribs spaced exactly 1.2 meters apart, bolted into basalt. The design matches late-war German bunker specifications. There is no habitation area, no bedding, no cooking equipment. This is not a base. It is storage, purpose-built. The team labels it Layer 1. But the second layer is stranger. Behind a reinforced bulkhead lies a series of sealed canisters. 12 in total. Each contains technical drawings wrapped in oilcloth. The ink remains sharp. The papers detail cold-resistant construction methods, ice anchoring techniques, and long-term material preservation protocols. Dates range from August 1943 to February 1945. These are not speculative sketches. They are finalized plans. However, container number 7 contains something unexpected. A personal notebook. Leather-bound. Initialed. The handwriting matches known samples from the engineer's service file. Entries are sparse, written every few weeks. He notes temperatures, structural stress, and supply depletion. Then, abruptly, the tone shifts. He writes about handoff conditions and future retrieval. No dates are given. But container number 10 holds something that changes everything. A sealed metal tube contains correspondence addressed not to Berlin, but to a naval logistics office in South America. The dates extend into late 1946. Germany no longer exists. Yet the letters discuss maintenance schedules and verification protocols. Someone is still receiving them. The final vault is open last. It is smaller, heavier. Inside are photographic plates, preserved perfectly by the cold. They show the engineer alive, standing beside the completed structure. The date marker reads January 1946. He is older, thinner, but unmistakably alive. Experts are brought in. Forensic analysts confirm the ink composition. Cryptographers decode marginal notes written in a simple substitution cipher. Architectural historians confirm the construction methods were years ahead of known polar engineering. DNA recovered from a glove fragment matches a living descendant with 99.8% probability. The archive does not prove a hidden Antarctic base, but it proves something far more disruptive. He survived. He planned for return. And he was not alone. There is no redemption here, only complexity. A man capable of meticulous planning, of long silence, of leaving behind a frozen confession rather than a public reckoning. History teaches us that endings are rarely as clean as records suggest. At 6:42 on that January morning, when steel met stone beneath Antarctic ice, the past did not roar back to life. It whispered. It reminded us that even in collapse, systems adapt. That defeat does not always mean disappearance, and that some truths wait patiently for the right moment to surface. The crate now rests in controlled archival storage. The site remains protected, its coordinates restricted. Further expeditions are planned, but years may pass before answers emerge. The ice is already closing again. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the drill stop. The wind pause. The moment when certainty fractures. The implications of the Antarctic archive ripple outward in slow, unsettling waves. For historians, the documents force a recalibration of what late-war German planning actually looked like. The evidence does not suggest a fantastical hidden empire beneath the ice, nor a functioning Antarctic base operating for decades. What it shows instead is something more precise and more disturbing: foresight. The engineer and those who authorized his mission understood that Germany was losing by early 1944. Rather than focusing exclusively on victory, certain technical branches pivoted toward preservation of knowledge, of methods, of leverage that could survive defeat. This explains why resources were diverted south when every liter of fuel mattered. It explains why polar engineering training expanded even as fronts collapsed. It explains why logistical anomalies appeared that never aligned with battlefield necessity. These were not acts of desperation alone. They were acts of contingency. However, the archive also punctures exaggerated post-war myths. There is no evidence of advanced superweapons hidden in Antarctica, no proof of a permanent colony, no indication that high-ranking Nazi leadership relocated there. The truth sits in an uncomfortable middle ground. Some theories were wrong in scale, but not entirely wrong in direction. This explains why certain investigators kept encountering dead ends. They were looking for bases and armies. What existed instead were caches, archives, and proof-of-concept structures, small, deniable, and easy to dismiss without physical evidence. Until now, the findings also vindicate a handful of researchers whose work was long marginalized. Archivists who questioned casualty lists, naval historians who flagged unexplained southern routes, engineers who argued that polar construction knowledge appeared too early in post-war expeditions to be coincidental. Their suspicions lacked proof. The ice provided it.